I've been driving trucks for nigh on 15 years now. Most of it spent crisscrossing the Appalachians, hauling everything from lumber to groceries along those twisty backroads that folks from the flatlands wouldn't dare touch after dark. The Blue Ridge Parkway's always been my favorite stretch, though. Those long, winding miles where the mountains rise up like silent guardians, mist clinging to the ridges like smoke from some forgotten fire. It's peaceful in a way that city folks don't get. Just you, the hum of the engine, and the endless whisper of wind through the pines. I've seen my share of wildlife out there, deer bounding across the lanes, black bears rummaging in the underbrush, even the occasional bobcat slinking away from my headlights. But nothing ever rattled me like that night in the fall of 2018. I was running a load from Asheville up toward Roanoke, the kind of overnight haul that pays extra but leaves you bone-tired by dawn. The leaves were turning, painting the hills in reds and golds that looked almost bloody under the setting sun. I'd stopped for coffee at a little diner just off the parkway earlier that evening, chatting with the waitress about the weather turning foul. She mentioned the fog rolling in thick from the valleys, warned me to watch for slick spots. I laughed it off, told her I'd driven worse. But as I climbed back into my rig, something felt off, a chill in the air that wasn't just the autumn bite. The road started climbing soon after, snaking up toward Milepost 300, with a parkway crest, one of those high ridges that make you feel like you're on the edge of the world. The fog had settled in by then, thick and swirling, turning my high beams into useless glows that bounced back at me like accusations. I kept my speed down, the semi groaning under the weight of the trailer as I navigated the curves. The radio was playing some old country tune, static crackling in and out as the signal fought through the mountains. I remember glancing at the clock around 9:30 p.m. and thinking about my wife back home, probably already in bed with the kids tucked in. That's when the headlights caught it. At first, I thought it was a tree limb fallen across the road, or maybe a rock slide from the cliffs above. But no, it was standing there, right in the middle of the lane, unmoving as a statue. Tall, God, so tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, if I had to guess, and broad across the shoulders like a linebacker gone wild. Its outline was fuzzy in the fog, but I could make out the dark, matted fur covering it from head to toe, blending so seamless with the encroaching trees that it almost looked like part of the forest had come alive. My foot slammed the brake pedal before my brain caught up, the air brakes hissing like a cornered snake as the truck shuddered to a stop. Inches, that's all that separated my grill from whatever the hell that was. The engine idled low, vibrating through the cab, and for a moment, everything went still. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, staring through the windshield. Its eyes were what got me first, reflecting back the lights like embers from a dying campfire, not the flat green of a deer or the yellow of a coyote. There was something in that gaze, a depth that made my stomach twist. It didn't bolt like an animal should. Instead, it just stood there, head slightly cocked, as if sizing me up. The fog muffled everything, but I swear I could smell it. A thick, wet earth scent mixed with something sharper, musky and primal, like an old hide left out in the rain too long. I reached for the horn, blasting it once, twice, expecting to scare off a bear or maybe some idiot in a costume playing a prank. But it didn't flinch. Instead, it let out this low rumble, a growl that started deep in its chest and built until it vibrated through the metal of my truck, rattling the coffee cup in the holder. Panic hit me then, cold and sharp like ice water down my back. Those hands, massive, almost human-like with fingers that looked too long, lifted slowly, reaching toward the front of the rig as if to touch it, or maybe push it back. I threw the gear into reverse without thinking, tires spinning on the damp asphalt, gravel spitting up as I backed away. The creature took a step forward, its weight making the ground seem to shift, but when I glanced up after steadying the wheel, it was gone. Just vanished into the fog-shrouded woods, like it had melted back into the trees. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel in my throat as I shifted back into drive and eased forward, scanning the roadside. The fog played tricks, turning every shadow into a lurking shape, every rustle of leaves into footsteps. I radioed out on the CB, my voice shakier than I'd like to admit. "This is Big Blue. Anyone copy?" Just had a close call up near 300, something big in the road. Bear maybe? Over. Static answered first, then a couple voices crackled through. One guy laughed, said it was probably a moose wandered down from up north. Another mentioned the old stories, the ones truckers whisper about over greasy spoons. Sightings of something not quite animal, not quite man, roaming these hills since before the roads were paved. Sasquatch, they call it, or Bigfoot, but out here in Appalachia, folks have their own names, the wood booger, or just the thing in the woods. I'd heard the tales before, dismissed them as boredom-fueled yarns, but right then, with the adrenaline still surging, they didn't seem so funny. I kept driving, eyes flicking to the mirrors every few seconds, convinced I saw movement just beyond the tree lean, a loping gait keeping pace, hidden in the underbrush. The parkway felt endless that night, each mile marker a small victory, but the quiet pressed in, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch far too close for comfort. By the time I pulled into a rest stop around Milepost 350, my nerves were frayed raw. It was one of those isolated pull-offs, just a gravel lot with a couple picnic tables and a vault toilet backed up against the forest. No other rigs around, which wasn't unusual that late, but it amplified the loneliness. I killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening, and tried to settle in the sleeper berth. Sleep wouldn't come, though. My mind kept replaying the encounter, the eyes, the growl, those reaching hands. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind sigh through the trees when it started. Branches snapping outside, not random like from a gust, but rhythmic, deliberate. Crack, pause, crack, like something circling the truck, testing the perimeter. I sat up, peering through the curtained window, but the fog had thickened again, turning the lot into a hazy void. Another snap, closer this time, right by the driver's side. My breath caught. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it out, but the beam just scattered in the mist. Was that a shadow? A hulking form, just at the edge of visibility? I told myself it was a deer, or maybe a raccoon rummaging, but deep down I knew better. The snaps continued for what felt like hours, pacing around the rig, never rushing, just persistent. I didn't dare step out. Instead, I huddled there, phone in hand with no signal, waiting for dawn. When the first light finally crept over the ridges, painting the fog in pale grays, the sound stopped. I ventured out cautiously, boots crunching on the gravel, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, massive and deep, pressed into the soft earth around my truck. Not bare tracks. These were elongated, with distinct toes, almost like a man's, but twice the size, leading from the woods and circling the semi before trailing back into the trees. I snapped a few pictures on my phone, but they didn't capture the unease, the way those prints made the hair on my arm stand up. I climbed back in and hit the road, radioing the encounter again, but the responses were skeptical, laced with jokes about moonshine and tall tales. I made it to Roanoke without further incident, delivered the load, and headed home, but the drive back was torture. Every curve reminded me of that ridge, every shadow a potential watcher. I started avoiding the parkway at night after that, opting for interstates even if it added hours. But the dread didn't stay on the road. Weeks turned to months, and I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was a trick of the light, a bear on its hind legs maybe distorted by the fog. My wife noticed a change, though. The way I jolt at night sounds, or stare out the window at our wooded backyard like something might emerge. I showed her the photos once. She went quiet, then suggested I talk to someone, a counselor maybe. But how do you explain it without sounding crazy? Then came the dreams, reliving the encounter, but each time, the figure got closer, its hands wrapping around the steering wheel, those eyes boring into mine with a silent question. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, and more than once, I swore I heard branches snapping outside our house, even though we're miles from the parkway. It's been years now, and I still drive for a living, but I stick to daylight runs when I can. The Blue Ridge calls to me sometimes, that familiar pull of the mountains, but I resist. I've heard more stories since. Other truckers whispering about similar sightings. Locals talking of old Cherokee legends about guardians of the woods, beings that protect the wild places from intruders like us. Was it one of them? Or just some feral man gone wild in the hills, surviving on instinct? I don't know, and that's the part that eats at me. The not knowing leaves a hollow ache, a quiet sorrow that whatever I saw that night, it saw me too, mark me in some way. These mountains hold secrets older than the roads we carve through them, and sometimes they step out to remind us we're the outsiders. I check my mirrors more than I used to, even on straight highways, half expecting to see those eyes reflecting back. And on foggy nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next rig to crest that ridge, blocking the path not with malice, but with a simple, unspoken warning. Turn back. But I never do tell the full story to just anyone. It's too real, too disturbing in its simplicity. No blood, no chase, just that lingering presence that shifts how you see the world. The isolation of the road used to be a comfort. Now it's a cage, trapping me with memories that won't fade. My kids ask why I don't take them camping in the Appalachians like I used to promise, and I make excuses about work. Truth is, I'm afraid, not of dying out there, but of confirming what I already suspect, that the woods are alive with things we're not meant to understand. Watching from the mist, their rhythms echoing in the snaps of branches long after you think you've escaped. And in the quiet hours, when sleep evades me, I feel that dread settle in again, a sorrowful weight, knowing that once you've seen it, the mountains never let you go. They pull you back, one foggy night at a time, until the line between memory and reality blurs into something you can't outrun. Story 2. I've been a long-haul trucker for close to 20 years, most of it spent weaving through the spine of the Appalachians, where the roads twist like veins through ancient rock and the trees crowd in like they're trying to reclaim what's theirs. The Blue Ridge Parkway is one of those routes that can feel like a blessing or a curse, depending on the hour and the weather. In the daytime, it's all sweeping vistas and tourist pullouts, but at night, especially in winter, it turns into something else. Isolated, unforgiving, with the kind of quiet that presses on your ears until you start hearing things that aren't there. Or maybe they are. I was running solo that December night in 2020, right in the thick of that go-doffel pandemic when the world felt even emptier than usual. No diners open late, no chatter on the CB, just me, my rig, and a load of medical supplies headed north from Charlotte. Snow had dusted the guardrails earlier that day. Not enough to chain up, but plenty to make the curves slick and treacherous. The stars were out sharp overhead, like pinpricks in black velvet, but the cold seeped through everything, making my joints ache even with the heater blasting. I'd been pushing hard, eyes heavy from the monotonous hum of the engine, when I decided to pull into an overlook near Milepost 400. It was one of those spots high up where the parkway hugs the ridge and drops off into valleys that swallow sound. I needed to stretch my legs, shake off the fog in my head, maybe light up a smoke to keep awake. The lot was empty, as expected. No sane soul out there in the dead of winter past midnight. I killed the lights, but left the engine idling for warmth, the low rumble a small comfort against the oppressive silence. Stepping out, my boots crunched on the thin layer of snow, and the air hit me like a slap. Crisp, biting, carrying the faint scent of pine and frozen earth. I leaned against the side of the cab, fumbling for my cigarettes, and took a deep drag, watching my breath cloud in the starlight. The world felt paused, like I was the only thing moving in it. No wind, no distant traffic, just the occasional creak of ice settling on branches, like the forest was breathing slow and steady. That's when the howl cut through the night. It started low, distant, echoing up from the valleys below like a warning from the deep. Not a wolf, too deep, too primal, vibrating in a way that made my chest tighten. I've heard coyotes yip and wolves call in the distance, but this was different, almost mournful, like something calling out in pain or hunger. I froze, cigarette halfway to my lips, scanning the tree-line where the overlook dropped off in a shadow. The stars lit the ridge just enough to make out shapes, but the woods below were a black tangle, impenetrable. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally there, or maybe it was my eyes playing tricks after hours on the road. I shook it off at first, telling myself it was an animal, maybe an elk bugling out of season or some hunter's dog gone astray. But the howl lingered in the air, fading slow, leaving a hush that felt heavier than before. I finished my smoke quicker than usual, grinding it under my boot, ready to climb back in and keep moving. The isolation was getting to me, that winter quiet wrapping around like a shroud. As I turned toward the cab, another howl ripped out, closer this time, maybe 100 yards down the slope. It built from a rumble to a peak that echoed off the mountains, vibrating right through my bones. My heart kicked up, pounding in my ears as I strained to listen. No, not a wolf. The timbre was wrong, too guttural, almost human in its depth. I've spent enough nights in these hills to know the sounds. The screech of owls, the rustle of possums, the far-off bark of foxes. This wasn't any of them. I grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket, the beam cutting a weak path through the dark, illuminating patches of snow and bare rock. The tree-line danced in the light, branches swaying slightly though there was no breeze. Then, from the brush below the pullout, something moved, large, deliberate. It emerged slow, upright on two legs, its silhouette towering against the moonlit ridge behind it. My breath caught. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that, hunched but balanced, with long arms swinging low at its sides. The proportions screamed wrong. Too tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, broad across the chest like a man swollen by years in the wild, but covered in what looked like coarse hair, matted and dark. The smell hit me next, carried on a faint breeze that stirred from the valley. Rank, wild, like wet fur mixed with decay, and something sharper, almost like unwashed sweat. It paused there, just at the edge of the brush, sniffing the air with a tilt of its head. I could see its breath pluming in the cold, slow and steady. My mind raced. Feral person? Some hermit gone mad from too many winters alone? Stories float around these parts, old-timers talking about wild men in the hills, descendants of escaped slaves, or Civil War deserters who never came back to civilization, living off the land, shunning the world. Or maybe the Cherokee legends my grandpa used to spin about spirits of the forest that take on shapes to guard their domain. But this felt too real, too solid. Its eyes glinted in the flashlight beam, not reflective like an animal's, but with an eerie awareness, like it was studying me right back. My heart hammered as it let out another howl. This one so close it rattled my teeth, a deep vibration that seemed to call something from within the mountains themselves. I scrambled back toward the cab, feet slipping on the icy gravel, my hand fumbling for the door handle. The thing approached slowly, its massive feet crunching through the snow with a weight I could feel in the ground. Each step was measured, not aggressive but purposeful, like it was curious about this intruder in its territory. I yanked the door open and hauled myself inside, slamming it shut and hitting the locks. The cab felt like a fragile bubble then, the windows fogging from my ragged breaths. I peered out, flashlight pressed against the glass, and caught glimpses. Coarse hair clumped with snow, a face that was almost ape-like in its broad features. Heavy brow, flat nose, yet disturbingly human, with eyes set deep under ridges, holding a glint of intelligence that made my skin crawl. It stopped a few feet from the truck, towering over the hood, and raised one hand, long-fingered, knuckled like a man's but larger, nails dark and chipped. It pressed that hand against the passenger window, the glass creaking under the pressure, leaving a smudged print that smeared the frost. No growl, no lunge, just that steady gaze like it was trying to understand what I was, or maybe warning me away. I didn't wait for more. I threw the rig into gear, tires spinning before catching traction, and peeled out of the lot, the Overlook shrinking in my mirrors. The howl followed me, fading into the night as I accelerated down the parkway. Curves be damned. My hands shook on the wheel, the adrenaline crashing through me like a wave. I radioed out, voice cracking. Anyone copy? Just had a hell of a scare at 400 Overlook. Something big out there. Not a bear. Over. Static mostly, then a sleepy voice from miles away. All right, buddy? Probably just the wind playing tricks. These mountains will do that. I didn't push it. Who'd believe me? The rest of the drive blurred, checking mirrors for shadows that weren't there, jumping at every creak of the trailer. By dawn, I made my drop-off, hands still trembling as I signed the papers. I crashed at a motel, but sleep brought dreams of that face at the window, those eyes searching mine. Days later, back home in a little hollow outside Boone, I thought it was over. Parked the rig in the driveway, snow melting into mud under the tires. But as I walked around to check the straps, I saw them. Prints similar to the one on the window, large, humanoid, circling the truck like they'd been left overnight. No fresh snow here, but the mud held them clear, toes splayed, deeper than any boot. My wife came out, saw my face, asked what was wrong. I muttered something about animals, but she knew better. We live backed up against the woods, the kind where trails fade into nothing and old stories linger about things that watch from the trees. I hosed off the truck, scrubbed the window print away, but the image stuck. Nights after, I'd hear eerie sounds, branches cracking in rhythms too, even for wind, low murmurs that could be howls carried from afar. I started sleeping with the light on, jumping at shadows in the yard. It's been years, but the mountains don't let go easy. I still drive the Parkway when I have to, but I avoid overlooks after dark, stick to the interstates where lights and traffic drown out the quiet. My kids notice the change, the way I stare into the woods during hikes, or wake up sweating from dreams where that hand presses not against glass, but flesh. Was it a feral man surviving in isolation, driven by hunger or madness? Or something older, a legend made flesh, guardian of these ancient hills? The not knowing gnaws at me, a sorrowful confusion that turns beauty into threat. These Appalachians hold secrets in their folds, unexplainable dread woven into the mist and snow. And sometimes on winter nights when the stars shine sharp, I swear I hear that howl again, echoing not from the valleys, but from within, a lingering fear that whatever it was, it followed me home, waiting in the silence for the next pullout, the next moment alone. The isolation never ends. It just shifts, settling in your bones like the cold, leaving you forever listening, forever wondering what's out there in the dark, watching back. Story 3. I've been behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler for most of my adult life, logging miles across the Appalachians where the roads carve through hills older than memory. The Blue Ridge Parkway has always been a mixed bag for me. Beautiful in the daylight with those endless views, but at night, it turns lonesome, the kind of isolation that seeps into your bones and makes you question every shadow. Back in the spring of 2017, I was hauling a load of lumber from Waynesville up toward Virginia. The rain coming down steady like it does in these mountains, turning the asphalt into a slick mirror. It was late, pushing midnight, and the wipers slapped back and forth in a rhythm that lulled you if you weren't careful. Fog had rolled in thick from the valleys, spilling over the ridges like smoke from a hidden fire, and my headlights struggled to punch through it, casting everything in a hazy glow. I'd driven this stretch 100 times, knew the curves like the lines on my palm, but something about that night felt off from the start. The air heavier, the radio sputtering with static even on clear channels. As I approached Milepost 350, the road dipped toward one of those old tunnels. The Twin Tunnel, they call it, bored through the rock back in the 30s, all rough stone walls dripping with moisture and echoes that swallow sound. It's not the longest one on the Parkway, maybe 350 feet end to end, but in bad weather, it feels like a throat closing around you. The entrance loomed up out of the fog, arched and dark, with water trickling down the sides like the mountain was weeping. I eased off the gas a bit, the truck rumbling low as I entered, the wipers still thwacking uselessly against the glass. Inside, the headlights bounced off the wet walls, creating flickers that played tricks on your eyes, shadows stretching like fingers, the ceiling low enough to make you hunch even in the cab. The radio cut out entirely then, not gradually but all at once, leaving only the hum of the engine and the distant patter of rain outside. I remember thinking it was just the rock interfering like it does sometimes, but the silence pressed in, amplifying every creak from the trailer. Halfway through, something caught in my high beams at the far end. A hulking form crouched low against the wall, as if it had been waiting there in the damp. At first, I thought it was a rock fall or maybe a vagrant huddled for shelter, but as my lights washed over it, it rose slowly, unfolding to a height that made my gut twist. Easily 8 feet, broad and solid, with shaggy fur or matted hair dripping from the tunnel's moisture. It wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty, and they don't stand like that, upright with a hunch that suggested not just strength but awareness. Its eyes locked on mine through the windshield, glowing faintly in the dim light. Not the sharp, reflective shine of an animal, but something deeper, more knowing, almost like a challenge daring me to keep coming. I slowed instinctively, the truck's rumble echoing off the walls like thunder in a barrel, vibrating through the steering wheel into my hands. The air inside the cab grew thick, laced with a scent that seeped in despite the sealed doors. Wet earth mixed with something rank, like unwashed hide and decay. The figure didn't bolt or shy away like wildlife would. Instead, it stepped deliberate into the lane, arms dangling long like pendulums, swinging loose at its sides. I could hear its breathing over the rain, a heavy, wet rasp that cut through the engine noise, sending chills racing down my spine like ice melt. It tilted its head slightly, as if curious about this roaring machine intruding on its space, the movement too human, too thoughtful for comfort. Panic gripped me then, cold and sudden, my foot hovering over the brake before slamming the horn instead. The blare echoed wildly in the confined space, bouncing back at me. But it did nothing. The thing just stood there, unmoving, its massive frame filling the tunnel's mouth like a sentinel guarding secrets buried in the rock. Rain dripped from its form, pooling on the ground, and in the headlights, I caught glimpses of details that haunted me later. Coarse strands clinging to broad shoulders, a face partially obscured but with features that blurred the line between man and beast, deep-set eyes under a heavy brow, a jaw set firm. I floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward with a growl, tires gripping the wet pavement as I swerved to the right, aiming for the narrow gap beside it. The trailer swung wide, and I felt a brush against the side, a glancing blow that shuddered through the rig like something had reached out and grazed it. In the rearview mirror, as I burst out into the night, it stood there still, silhouetted against the tunnel's glow, watching me emerge into the fog. The rain pelted harder now, but the fog swallowed its shape almost immediately, leaving only the memory of those eyes burning in my mind. I kept driving, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, the radio crackling back to life with fragmented voices that sounded far too distant. For hours after, the feeling of being pursued clung to me, branches rustling unnaturally along the roadside, not from wind but with a rhythm that suggested footsteps keeping pace just out of sight. Every curve, every dip in the road amplified it, the mountains closing in like they were alive and whispering. I pulled over at the next rest area, miles down the parkway, my legs shaky as I stepped out into the drizzle to check the trailer. There on the side panel was a long scrape, fresh and deep, with what looked like strands of dark hair caught in the metal, coarse, matted, like nothing from a bear or deer. I radioed other drivers on the CB, voice steadier than I felt. Big Blue here. Anyone see anything weird near the Twin Tunnel? Had a close call, something in the road. Over. Responses trickled in, mostly static-laced laughs about fog playing tricks or old moonshine tales. But one voice, gravelly and low, paused before saying, "Seen shadows like that before, son. Mountains got their keepers. Best not linger." I didn't sleep that night, huddled in the sleeper berth with the doors locked, listening to the rain and the occasional snap of twigs in the woods beyond the lot. Dawn brought a gray light that chased the fog, but not the unease. Days turned to weeks, and I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was a feral man. Plenty of stories in these hills about folks gone wild, living off the grid in the deep hollers, descendants of hermits or runaways who shun the world. Or maybe an escaped animal, something exotic from a roadside zoo, distorted by the dark and my tired eyes. But the scrape on the trailer stayed, a tangible reminder I couldn't buff out, and the hair. I kept a strand in my glove box, coarse and unfamiliar, though I never got it tested. My routes changed after that. I avoided the Parkway tunnels at night, opting for longer hauls on the interstates where lights and traffic kept the isolation at bay. My wife noticed the shift, the way I'd stare out at our backyard woods during supper, or wake up gasping from dreams where those eyes watched from every shadow. She'd press me, but how do you explain without sounding unhinged? The kids asked why we stopped camping in the mountains, and I'd mumble about work, but truth was the dread had rooted deep, a quiet sorrow that turned familiar trails into threats. Years on, I still drive, but the Blue Ridge calls less now, its beauty tainted by that rainy night. I've heard more whispers since, truckers swapping yarns over coffee about shapes in the tunnels, old-timers recounting Cherokee legends of ancient watchers in the rock, guardians of passages that bridge worlds we don't understand. Was it one of them? A lost soul twisted by solitude, or something older, claiming these damp corridors as its domain? The confusion lingers, a hollow ache that no rational explanation fills. I've gone back during the day, walked the tunnel's length with sunlight streaming through, but the walls hold echoes of that rasp, the air still thick with unspoken presence. At night, when rain slicks the roads and fog rises, I swear I feel those eyes on me again, not aggressive but watchful, an unexplainable dread that something ancient stirs in these mountains, pursuing not with speed but with patience. The survival isn't in escaping, it's in carrying the weight, forever glancing in the rear view, wondering if the next tunnel will bring it back, leaving you adrift in sorrowful isolation, the eerie sounds of the forest a constant, haunting companion. Story 4. I've spent more years than I care to count hauling loads through the heart of the Appalachians, where the Blue Ridge Parkway stretches like a vein through the wild, untamed hills. It's a route that demands respect, twisting turns, sheer drops, and stretches so remote that your CB radio might as well be a tin can on a string. In the summer of 2019, I was running a refrigerated load from Knoxville up towards Charlottesville, the kind of job that keeps the air conditioning cranked against the sweltering heat rising off the asphalt. The sun had been beating down all day, turning the cab into an oven, and as evening crept in, the engine started complaining, a low whine that built into a stutter. I pulled over near Milepost 200, one of those isolated spots where the road hugs a ridge, flanked by dense woods on one side and a guardrail overlooking a hazy valley on the other. No cell service out there, of course. These mountains swallow signals like they do lost hikers. I popped the hood under the fading twilight, steam hissing out like a sigh of defeat, and scattered my tools on the shoulder, figuring it was just the radiator overheating again. Sweat trickled down my back as I tinkered, the air thick with the scent of hot metal and pine sap, the last birds calling faintly from the treetops. The light was dimming fast, that soft purple haze settling over everything, when I first noticed the woods across the road stirring. At first, I chalked it up to deer, plenty of them in these parts, especially at dusk when they graze the edges. But the movement was too deliberate, not the quick darts of animals foraging, but a slow weave between the trees, a large shape shifting just out of clear view, keeping pace with where I stood bent over the engine. I straightened up, wiping grease on my jeans, and squinted into the underbrush. The leaves rustled softly, then went still when I did, like whatever was at pause to watch. A chill prickled my skin despite the heat, and I called out, "Hey, anyone there? Need help or something?" My voice echoed, strangely off the trees, swallowed by the growing dark, but only silence answered, thick and waiting. I shook my head, muttering to myself about fatigue playing tricks, and went back to the radiator, but the unease lingered, a subtle weight in the air that made the familiar sounds of the forest feel off-kilter. As the sun dipped below the ridge, casting long shadows that blurred the line between tree and twilight, the stirring started again. Closer this time, maybe 30 yards off the road. I caught glimpses through the foliage. A towering height, easily over 7 feet, with a broad chest that suggested raw power, covered in what looked like dark, matted hair or ragged clothing tangled with vines. Arms longer than any man swung low, brushing the undergrowth. It wasn't rushing, just observing, its form partially hidden behind trunks, but unmistakable in its bulk. The air grew heavier then, laced with a foul, earthy stench that rolled in like fog. Rotting leaves mixed with musk, sharp and animalistic, the kind that clings to your nostrils and turns your stomach. I froze, tools forgotten, my mind racing through possibilities. A bear upright? No, too slender in the limbs. A hiker in distress, maybe layered in filthy gear? But hikers don't move like that, silent and predatory. I called out again, louder this time. If you're hurt, I got a first aid kit. Come on out. The words hung there, unanswered, until a soft grunt broke the quiet. A low, guttural sound that echoed strangely, not quite animal, not quite human, like something mimicking speech from deep in its throat. Night fell proper then, the sky darkening to ink, stars pricking through overhead but offering no comfort down here in the hollow. The heat of the day lingered, sticky and oppressive, but a deeper chill settled in my bones as the shape edged closer, its outline clearer against the underbrush now that my eyes had adjusted. I could make out more details in the gloom. A hunched posture, face obscured by shadow or hair, but eyes piercing through, dark and fixed on me, unblinking, with an intensity that felt too knowing for wildlife. It stopped at the tree-line, just across the narrow road, and I backed toward the cab slowly, heart starting to thud in my chest. The stench intensified, wafting over in waves, making my eyes water. I fumbled for my flashlight in the door pocket, the beam shaking as I switched it on, sweeping the woods. The light caught it briefly, coarse strands matted with dirt, skin beneath pale and weathered, or maybe just an illusion in the dark. It shifted away from the beam, melting back a step, but those eyes stayed locked, reflecting nothing but absorbing the light like voids. I retreated fully into the cab, then slamming the door and locking it, the metal a thin barrier against whatever lurked out there. The windows fogged slightly from my quick breaths, and I wiped the glass, peering out as the shape began to circle the truck slowly, its movements deliberate, thumping lightly against the side panels now and then, like testing the structure or maybe just announcing its presence. Each thump vibrated through the frame, soft but insistent, sending jolts up my spine. My heart raced, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the distant crickets, and I grabbed the CB radio, twisting the knob desperately. This is Lone Star, broken down near Milepost 200. Got something out here, animal or person, not sure. Need a tow, over. Static drowned my words, crackling like laughter, no responses cutting through. I tried again, voice tighter, but the mountains interfered, leaving me isolated in the humming silence of the cab. Hours stretched like that, me huddled in the seat, flashlight clutched like a weapon, listening to the circling steps crunch on gravel, the occasional grunt echoing closer, as if it were growing bolder in the dark. The beam from my light revealed more as it passed the windows, massive footprints in the soft shoulder dirt, imprinted deep with toes splayed wide, not boot marks, but something bare and oversized, trailing around the rig in a loop. It paused at the rear sometimes, thumping the trailer harder, rocking the whole setup slightly, and I'd yell out, "Get back! I got a gun in here!" A lie, but desperation breeds bluff. No response, just that steady pacing, the stench seeping through the vents now, turning the air inside stale and heavy. Sweat soaked my shirt, the heat mingling with fear into a suffocating mix, and my mind wandered to the old stories I'd heard in truck stops. Feral people in these hills, folks who'd gone off-grid generations ago, surviving on roots and game, shunning civilization until they became part of the wild. Or the Cherokee legends my uncle used to tell around campfires, about spirits or guardians that haunt the deep woods, watching intruders with eyes that see through to your soul. Was this one of them? A lost soul twisted by isolation, or was something born of the forest itself? The not knowing gnawed at me, turning every shadow outside into a threat, every rustle into footsteps drawing near. Time blurred in the cab, the dashboard clock ticking slow as molasses, my phone useless without bars. I rationed the flashlight battery, flicking it on only when the thumps grew too close, illuminating glimpses of that hulking form, arms dangling, head tilted as if listening to my ragged breaths. It never charged, never made a move to break in, but the persistence wore me down, a creeping dread that built like storm clouds, making survival feel like a fragile thread. I thought of my family back home, the wife waiting with dinner gone cold, the kids asking where Dad was, and a sorrow welled up, sharp and unexpected, for the simple life I'd taken for granted. The mountains felt alive then, pressing in with their ancient weight, the Parkway a thin scar on land that remembered older ways. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably 3 hours, headlights pierced the dark from down the road. A tow truck rumbling up, its yellow beacons cutting through the night like salvation. The driver, an older fellow with a beard like steel wool, hopped out and approached, toolkit in hand. "You the one who called?" "Signal spotty, but dispatch got through eventually." I stumbled out of the cab, legs numb, and pointed toward the woods, babbling about the presence, the prints, the grunts. He shone his light around, frowning at the trampled grass and those deep impressions, but shrugged it off. Probably a bear or kids messing around. These hills got all sorts. By then, whatever it was had vanished, melting back into the trees without a trace beyond the disturbed earth. We hooked up the rig, and he towed me to a garage in the next town, the drive silent except for my shaky recounting. He listened polite, but I saw the doubt in his eyes, the kind reserved for road-weary tales spun too late at night. Days later, after repairs, I drove back along the same stretch in daylight, the sun bleaching the fear to a dull ache. I stopped at the spot, walked the shoulder, and found more prints, fresh ones, circling where my truck had been, as if it had returned to check. The Parkway feels haunted now, not with ghosts, but with unseen watchers waiting for vulnerability, a place where the line between man and wild blurs into something primal. I still haul loads, but I avoid breakdowns like the plague, carrying extra coolant and a real pistol now, though I doubt it'd help. My wife notices the changes, the way I flinch at night, sounds in our yard, or stare into the woods during barbecues, half expecting eyes to stare back. The kids sense it too, asking why I don't tell campfire stories anymore. Truth is, the dread never fully fades, a lingering confusion that twists sorrow into every shadow. Was it a feral wanderer, driven mad by solitude, or a legend stepped from folklore into flesh? The mountains hold their secrets close, whispering through eerie rustles and unexplained grunts, leaving me forever vigilant, forever alone in the knowledge that out there, in the remote stretches, something lurks, patient, watching, instilling a quiet terror that echoes long after the engine roars back to life. And on humid summer nights, when the air hangs heavy, I swear I catch that stench again, carried on the breeze, a reminder that vulnerability invites the unknown, and once invited, it never truly leaves. Story 5. I've been trucking through the Appalachians for over a decade now, the kind of life where the road becomes your closest companion and the mountains your silent witnesses. The Blue Ridge Parkway has always felt like home in a way, those long, winding stretches where the world falls away, leaving just the hum of the engine and the whisper of wind through the leaves. But there's a flip side to that isolation, a quiet that can turn on you when you least expect it. It was a crisp fall morning in 2021, the air sharp with the scent of turning foliage, reds and oranges blazing against the ridges like a slow-burning fire. I'd pulled an all-nighter hauling produce from Georgia up toward Pennsylvania, my eyes gritty from the endless dark hours, caffeine wearing thin in my veins. Around Milepost 450, I spotted a secluded rest area, one of those forgotten pull-offs tucked into a hollow, surrounded by dense forest that crowded right up to the gravel lot. No facilities, just a couple weathered picnic tables and a sign faded by years of weather. The lot was empty, as these spots often are at dawn, and I figured it was perfect for a quick nap before pushing on. I eased the rig in, killed the engine, and stepped out, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves that blanketed the ground like a rust-colored carpet. The chill hit me immediately, that fresh mountain bite that clears your head even as it seeps into your bones. I stretched, rolling my shoulders to shake off the stiffness, and took a deep breath of the pine-laced air. That's when I noticed them, enormous footprints pressed into the mud along the shoulder, easily twice the size of my own size 12 boots, leading straight from the woods across the lot to my trailer. They were fresh, the edges sharp and undisturbed by wind or rain, with distinct toes. 5 of them, splayed wide like a bare foot but impossibly large, the impressions deep enough to suggest something heavy, substantial. Not bare tracks. I've seen those plenty with their claw marks and padded soles. These were 2 humanoid, the stride long and purposeful, like a man's but stretched beyond reason. Unease settled in my gut, slow at first, like a fog rolling up from the valley. Who, or what, could leave prints like that? I glanced around the empty lot, the forest looming silent and still, no birdsong yet to break the hush. Curiosity got the better of me, overriding the prickling at the back of my neck, and I followed the trail back toward the tree-line, stepping carefully to avoid smudging them. The prints led into the thick brush, weaving between oaks and maples where the undergrowth tangled like forgotten secrets. The leaves crunched under my feet, louder than they should have been in the quiet, and the air grew cooler, damper, as the canopy closed overhead. I'd gone maybe 20 yards and when a low whistle pierced the stillness, almost like a bird call, but off-key, too drawn out and deliberate, echoing from deeper in the woods. It wasn't a whip-poor-will or any familiar song. It had a strange timbre, almost mimicry, like something trying to blend in but missing the mark. I froze, heart picking up a notch, scanning the shadows where the light filtered through in dappled patches. That's when I spotted it. A massive figure partially concealed behind a thick tree trunk, its form blending so seamlessly with the bark that I might have missed it if not for the subtle shift. A breath, perhaps, or the slightest lean. It was watching me with unblinking intensity, eyes dark and fixed from the gloom. No illusion. As my vision adjusted, the details sharpened, sloping shoulders broad as a barn door, a domed head rising above, exuding a presence that felt ancient and territorial, like the mountain itself had taken shape. The smell hit next, overpowering and wild, wafting through the trees like a warning. A mix of wet fur, musk, and something deeper, like earth turned over after a rain mingled with decay. It turned my stomach, clinging to the back of my throat, and I took an involuntary step back. The figure didn't move at first, just observed, its chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. I can make out more now, dark hair or pelt matted against its frame, arms hanging low, fingers curled slightly. It wasn't charging or fleeing. It just was a silent sentinel in the underbrush. My mind raced through explanations. A prankster in a suit? Too remote, too early for that. A bear on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong, too upright, too deliberate in its stillness. Stories I'd heard in diners flickered through my head, old-timers whispering about what boogers or feral folk in these hills, people who'd vanished into the wild generations ago, living off the land until they became something else, something not quite human anymore. Or the Cherokee tales my grandpa spun by the fire, about guardians of the forest that watch from the shadows, testing those who stray too far. I backed away slowly, hands raised, palms out, murmuring under my breath. Easy now, I'm leaving, no trouble here. But it mirrored my steps, emerging slightly from behind the tree, arms swinging low in a gait that was fluid yet heavy, each footfall muffled by the leaves but vibrating through the ground. Panic crept in then, not a rush but a steady build, like water rising in a creek bed. I turned, walking faster now, the whistle sounding again, closer, almost inquisitive, echoing off the trunks. Branches snapped behind me, not frantic but paced, as if it were following at a distance, curious or hurting me back. I broke into the lot, heart hammering, and scrambled into the cab, slamming the door and hitting the locks. The engine roared to life with a twist of the key, idling rough as I caught my breath, staring out at the tree line. Nothing at first, just the empty woods staring back, but then it appeared at the edge, taller than I'd realized, 7, maybe 8 feet, peering toward the truck with eyes that held a strange curiosity, not aggression, but something deeper, like recognition or warning. It approached slow, crossing the gravel with deliberate steps, the crunch audible even over the engine. I gripped the wheel, frozen, as it neared the window, its massive frame filling the view. Up close, the details etched into my memory. Coarse hair clumped with dirt and leaves, skin beneath weathered and pale in patches, a face broad and flat with a heavy brow, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. It raised one hand, enormous, knuckles thick, fingers dexterous, and rested it on the hood, the metal creaking under the weight, rocking the rig gently like a child testing a toy. No growl, no lunge, just that steady gaze through the glass, eyes locking on mine with an intelligence that chilled me to the core. Was it studying me, claiming territory? The smell seeped in through the vents, thick and primal, turning the cab into a trap. I snapped out of it, threw the gear into drive, and peeled out, tires spitting gravel as I swung back onto the parkway. In the rear view, it stood there in the road, unmoving, watching me go until the curve swallowed it from sight. The drive after blurred into a haze of adrenaline and doubt. I radioed other truckers, voice shaky. "Lone wolf here. Anyone near 450 rest area? Saw something big in the woods. Prints like you wouldn't believe. Over." Static mostly, then chuckles about Bigfoot sightings or too much coffee. One voice, older and grave, paused before replying. "Them hills got eyes, boy. Best keep moving." I did, pushing through to my drop-off, but the image stuck, that figure at the window, hand on the hood, eyes probing like it saw right through me. Back home in a little cabin outside Asheville, I tried to shake it, scrubbing the rig clean, but mud from the lot clung, and in it partial prints that match what I'd seen. My wife noticed the change, the way I'd stare out at our wooded yard during dinner, or wake up gasping from dreams where footsteps circled the house. She'd ask, gentle, but I'd brush it off, not wanting to drag her into the confusion gnawing at me. Weeks passed, and I returned to the routes, but rest stops unnerve me now, those quiet pockets where the forest presses close. I avoid them when I can, opting for lit truck stops even if it means longer drives. The footprints haunt my dreams, morphing into paths that lead not away but toward home, the whistle calling from our backyard. I've scoured old books and online forums since, reading about similar encounters, truckers, hikers, locals whispering of feral clans in the deep hollers, survivors of forgotten times who roamed the ridges, or perhaps something older, woven into the land's fabric. Was it one of them? A lost human warped by isolation, or a legend breathed to life by the mountains themselves? The sorrow hits hardest in the quiet hours, a lingering fear that I've been marked, that vulnerability invites the unseen. These Appalachians hold unexplainable dread in their folds, eerie sounds that mimic and mislead, strange sightings that blur reality's edges. And on crisp fall mornings, when leaves crunch underfoot, I swear I hear that whistle again, faint on the wind, a subtle reminder that something shares these mountains, observing from the shadows, waiting for the next weary traveler to pull over and listen. The survival isn't in fleeing, it's in carrying the weight, forever glancing over your shoulder, confusion twisting into sorrow as the isolation settles deeper, a companion that never truly leaves. Story 6. I've been a trucker for going on 25 years, most of it spent navigating the backbones of the Appalachians, where the roads twist through valleys and over ridges like they're alive and trying to shake you off. The Blue Ridge Parkway is one of those places that can lull you into a false sense of peace during the day, with its scenic overlooks and endless green. But come nightfall, especially in a storm, it turns into something else entirely. A lonely ribbon cutting through wilderness that hasn't changed much since the first settlers got lost in it. Back in the summer of 2016, I was hauling a load of machinery parts from Atlanta up to Richmond, the kind of run that pays well but eats at your sleep. The weather had been threatening all afternoon, dark clouds piling up over the mountains like unspoken warnings, and by evening, as I climbed onto the parkway near Milepost 100, the rain started sheeting down, thunder rumbling distant at first, like the hills were grumbling to themselves. My wipers slapped back and forth, barely keeping up, and the headlights carved weak tunnels through the downpour, illuminating guardrails slick with water and trees bending under the wind. I remember sipping coffee from my thermos, the cab warm and familiar, radio tuned to some AM station playing old bluegrass to keep me company. The storm built slow, the way they do in these parts. Rain turning from a patter to a roar, lightning flashing across the sky in jagged veins that lit the ridges like daylight for split seconds. I kept my speed steady, knowing these curves could kill if you pushed too hard, the trailer swaying slightly on the wet asphalt. It was around a sharp bend, where the road hugs a steep drop on one side and dense forest on the other, that I first caught something in my side mirrors. At first, I dismissed it as a shadow thrown by the lightning, a trick of the storm playing on tired eyes. But as I straightened out, glancing back again, it was there, something loping parallel to the road just inside the tree line, keeping effortless pace with my rig. The thunder masked any sounds it might have made, but its presence hit me like a shift in the air, a weight that made my skin crawl despite the heater blasting. I blinked hard, telling myself it was a deer or maybe a bear spooked by the weather, but the shape was wrong. Colossal, upright on two legs, form blurred by the rain, but unmistakably tall, fur or hair slick and dark against the flashes. I accelerated a touch, the engine growling louder as I pushed through the curve, but it matched my speed without falter, weaving through the undergrowth with an unnatural grace that sent a chill racing up my arms. Glimpses came in the mirror, height dwarfing the young saplings it brushed past, a gait that was bipedal yet animalistic, long strides eating up the ground like it was born to these hills. Lightning cracked again, closer this time, illuminating details that etched in my mind. Broad shoulders hunched against the rain, arms pumping low, eyes flashing briefly in the storm's glow, not reflective like a cat's, but with a dull gleam that suggested awareness, maybe even intent. The radio crackled then, static spiking through the music, voices from distant stations warping into guttural noises that sounded almost like growls or muffled words, twisting the familiar tunes into something eerie. I twisted the dial, trying to clear it, but the interference persisted as if the storm, or whatever was out there, was jamming the signal, isolating me further in the cab. The scent seeped in next, musky and primal, slipping through the vents despite the windows being sealed tight against the rain. It turned my stomach, a rank odor like wet dog mixed with earth and something wilder, untamed, like the smell of a forgotten corner of the forest where things rot undisturbed. I rolled up the vents, but it lingered, cloying, making the air inside feel thick and foreign. My heart started thumping harder, a steady drum against my ribs, as the thing crossed closer in the mirror, nearly brushing the guardrail now, its arm extending slightly, as if to signal me or reach out toward the truck. Panic flickered in, not a bolt, but a slow burn, my hands gripping the wheel tighter, knuckles paling. Was it trying to flag me down? Or something else? Something territorial? I've heard the stories over coffee at truck stops. Locals whispering about feral people in these mountains. Folks who'd gone off the grid decades ago. Maybe even centuries, descendants of runaway miners or war deserters who adapted to the wild until they weren't quite people anymore. Or the older tales, Cherokee legends of shapes in the woods that stalk the unwary, guardians or ghosts blurred by time. I'd always laugh them off as folklore to pass the miles, but right then, with the storm raging and that silent stalker matching my every turn, they didn't seem so far-fetched. I veered sharply around another bend, tires hydroplaning for a heart-stopping second on the flooded road, the trailer fishtailing before I regained control. In that moment, it vanished, diving into a ravine or melting back into the trees, swallowed by the dark. The storm eased a bit after that, rain slackening to a drizzle, thunder rumbling fainter as I put miles between me and that stretch. But the dread didn't fade. It coiled in my gut, a quiet weight that made every flash of lightning feel like eyes watching from the ridges. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see it loping back into view, relentless and silent. The radio cleared eventually, bluegrass resuming like nothing had happened, but the voices sounded hollow now, distant echoes in the cab. I pulled into a diner later that night, one of those roadside spots off the Parkway, with flickering neon and coffee that could strip paint. The place was half empty, a few locals hunched over plates, steam rising from mugs. I ordered eggs and hash, hands still shaky as I stirred sugar into my cup, and couldn't help but overhear the talk at the counter. Old-timers swapping yarns about the hills. One fella, weathered face like cracked leather, mentioned sightings similar to what I'd seen. Shapes along the curves, keeping pace with cars, vanishing when you look too hard. Wood devils, he called them, dismissed as folklore by outsiders but taken serious by those who'd lived here long enough. Another nodded, saying his grandpa had a run-in back in the 50s, something that followed his Model T through a storm, leaving prints too big for man or beast. They laughed it off after, chalking it up to moonshine visions or tired minds, but their eyes held that glint, the kind that says they believed more than they let on. I didn't chime in, just listened, the food turning to ash in my mouth, the scent from earlier still ghosting my nostrils. Driving on after, the parkway felt different, the curves lonelier, each shadow a potential lurker. I made my delivery in Richmond at dawn. The city lights a brief reprieve, but the memory clung like damp fog. Months turned to years, and I tried to bury it, rationalizing it as a bear distorted by the rain or a hiker in ragged gear caught in the wrong place. But the details persisted in dreams. That loping gait, the extended arm, the warped radio noises twisting into calls. My wife noticed the shift, the way I'd avoid stormy drives or wake up sweating, convinced something was pacing outside our trailer. She'd hold me, whispering it was just a bad night. But how do you explain the sorrow that settled in, a quiet confusion that turned the mountains I loved into places of dread? The kids asked why we stopped hiking the old trails, and I make excuses about work, but truth was the isolation scare me now. Not the empty roads, but what might share them unseen. I've gone back to that stretch since, in daylight with clear skies, walking the curves where it happened. But the woods hold their secrets tight, branches rustling with winds that carry faint, musky hints. Truckers still swap stories, and I listen closer now, piecing together fragments of similar encounters. Silent stalkers along the lonely bends, blurring the line between myth and reality in these fog-laden hills. Was it a feral survivor, twisted by years alone, or something older, a legend woven into the land's bones? The not knowing eats at you, a lingering fear that whatever it was, it chose me that night, marked me with its presence. These Appalachians don't give answers easy. They whisper through storms and shadows, eerie sounds that mimic thunder but feel too personal. And on rainy evenings, when lightning cracks the sky, I swear I feel it again. That weight in the air, a silent, relentless pursuit just beyond the tree line, leaving me adrift in sorrowful vigilance, forever questioning the curves ahead, the survival not in outrunning it, but in carrying the dread that it might still be out there, waiting for the next storm to bring it close once more. Story 7. I've been driving these rigs across the Appalachians for nearly 2 decades now. The kind of life where the miles blur into one long ribbon of asphalt and the mountains become both your sanctuary and your warden. The Blue Ridge Parkway has always held a special pull for me. Those sweeping curves through the mist-shrouded ridges, where the world feels ancient and untouched, far from the noise of interstates and cities. But there's a solitude to it that can turn on you, especially in the dead of night when the fog rolls in thick as secrets. It was early 2022, right after the new year, when the holidays had left me with a backlog of hauls, and I was running a load of auto parts from Charlotte up to Pittsburgh. I'd pushed through the evening, eyes heavy from the monotonous drone of the engine, and decided to park overnight at a pull-off around Milepost 250. It's one of those unassuming spots, just a widened shoulder backed by dense woods, no lights or amenities, perfect for catching a few hours in the sleeper cab without drawing attention. The fog had settled in heavy that night, blanketing everything in a soft white haze that muffled the world, turning distant trees into ghostly outlines. I killed the engine, the sudden quiet enveloping me like a shroud, and crawled into the berth, too tired to even undress fully. Sleep came quick, dreamless at first, the kind born of exhaustion. It started with the branches snapping, sharp cracks that pulled me from the depths, not the random pops of wind or settling wood, but a rhythm too purposeful, too deliberate. I lay there in the dark, breath held, listening as they circled the truck. Snap to the left, pause, snap ahead, another to the right, like footsteps testing the perimeter. The fog had fogged the windows, condensation beating on the glass from my own warmth against the chill outside. I sat up slow, heart starting a steady thump, and wiped a circle clear on the side window with my sleeve. The haze outside was thick, the pull-off swallowed in it, but there, squatting nearby, maybe 10 feet from the cab, was an enormous being, its back to me, form hunched and massive against the mist. Fur or hair matted and dark clung to its frame, dripping with moisture, blending into the shadows like it had risen from the earth itself. It wasn't moving much, just shifting slightly, as if listening or waiting. I froze, mind racing through the fog of sleep. Bear? No, too upright, too broad in the shoulders. A man? Too big, easily over 6 feet, even crouched, and no clothes visible in the dim. The air inside the cab grew stale then, infiltrated by its odor despite the sealed doors. A rank, wild scent like wet animal hide mixed with soil and something deeper. Almost human sweat turned sour by neglect. It turned slowly, head pivoting first, face shadowed, but features hinting at something caught between man and beast. Heavy brow, flat nose, jaw protruding slightly, eyes catching what little light filtered through the fog and meeting mine with a piercing intelligence that sent ice through my veins. No wild panic in that gaze, no animal blankness, just observation, steady and assessing, like it was weighing me as an intruder in its domain. My breath came shallow, fogging the glass again, and I didn't dare move, didn't blink, as if any twitch might shatter the fragile standoff. The thing rose to its full height then, unfolding like a shadow, stretching at dusk, towering over the cab, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, broad chest heaving slow, arms dangling long with hands that looked capable of crushing stone. One of those hands trailed along the side of the truck as it shifted, nails or claws scraping the metal with a low screech that echoed in the confined space, vibrating through the frame into my bones. It grunted softly, a sound like muffled speech, deep, guttural, almost questioning as if trying to communicate or warn. The odor intensified, seeping in stronger, making my eyes water and my stomach churn, a primal reminder that this wasn't my territory. I stayed statue still, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold, watching as it circled once more, pausing at the front, its form a dark silhouette against the fog. No aggression, no lunge or roar, just that unrelenting presence, observing with a patience that felt ancient, like the mountains had birthed it to guard their quiet. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, my mind flooding with fragments of stories I'd dismissed before. Truckers and diners whispering about shapes in the woods. Feral people descended from old hill families who'd gone wild after the mines closed or the wars ended, living off the land until they forgot how to be human. Or the deeper legends, the ones elders shared around fires. Forest spirits or watchers that the Cherokee called by names long forgotten. Entities that stalked the ridges to keep balance. I'd laughed at them once, chalked it up to loneliness breeding tall tales, but right then, with that being scraping my rig, they wrapped around me like the fog itself. Finally, it melted back into the haze, steps retreating with more snaps of branches, fading until the night swallowed it whole. I didn't wait for dawn. I started the engine immediately, the rumble shattering the silence. Headlights piercing the fog in twin beams that revealed nothing but swirling white and empty gravel. I eased out slow at first, scanning the tree line, but found no trace except deep impressions in the soft soil around where I'd parked. Footprints, oversized and bare, toes distinct like a man's but scaled up, leading back into the woods. The rest of the drive was tense, every snap in the underbrush along the roadside amplifying my paranoia, making me jump at shadows that danced in the lights. The fog lifted as I descended the ridges, but the unease clung, a weight in my chest that turned the familiar parkway into something foreign, haunted. I radioed a couple buddies on the CB, Once signal returned, voice steadier than I felt. Hey, anyone out near 250? Had a weird night. Something circling the rig in the fog. Bear maybe? Responses crackled back. Mostly jokes about too much black coffee or ghosts of moonshiners. But one voice, an old-timer I'd met at stops before, went quiet before saying, "Seen that stretch act up before. Mountains got their ways. Drive safe." I didn't push for more. Some things you don't want confirmed. By morning, I made my drop-off, hand still trembling slightly as I signed the manifests. The city bustle a stark contrast to the night's isolation. I crashed in a motel, but sleep brought replays. The eyes meeting mine, the scrape on the metal, the grunt echoing like a question unanswered. I checked the truck later. Faint scratches along the side. Nothing deep, but enough to prove it wasn't a dream. Strands of dark hair caught in the grooves that I pulled free and stared at, coarse and unfamiliar. Weeks passed, and I tried to bury it, rationalizing it as a vagrant in rags, maybe high or lost, distorted by the fog and my half-awake state. But the details nagged, the intelligence in that gaze too real to dismiss. My routes shifted after that. I avoided overnight pull-offs on the Parkway, sticking to lit lots even if it meant shorter naps. My wife back home noticed the change first. The way I'd stare out our kitchen window at the wooded lot behind the house, or jolt awake at night to every creak of the settling frame. She'd ask, her hand on my arm, "What's eating at you, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her bits, enough to ease the worry, but not the full weight. How do you share something that shifts your world without pulling them into the dread? The kids sensed it too, asking why Dad didn't tell scary stories by the campfire anymore during our rare weekends off. I'd make excuses about being tired from the road, but truth was the tales hit too close now, blurring into memory. Truckers share stories like this in hushed tones at greasy spoons, eyes darting as if speaking them aloud might summon whatever lurks. Experiencing it shifts everything. The Parkway's beauty hides a lurking unease, where ancient presences snap branches to announce themselves, not to harm, but to remind you of your place. I've driven that route since, in daylight with clear skies, stopping at the pull-off to walk the ground, but the impressions are gone, washed away by rain or time. Yet the fog brings it back, those nights when mist rises from the valleys, and I swear I hear branches cracking in rhythms too, even for nature. Is it out there still, observing from the tree-line, assessing passers-by? A feral soul surviving in solitude, or something woven into the legends of these hills. The confusion lingers, a sorrowful ache that no answer satisfies, turning isolation into a companion you can't shake. Years on, the dread has softened to a quiet vigilance, but it never fully leaves. I check my mirrors more, even on straight hauls, half expecting eyes in the shadows. The mountains call me back, their pull undeniable, but now with a whisper of warning. Survival out here isn't about fighting. It's about enduring the unexplainable, carrying the weight of what you've glimpsed. And in the still hours when fog blankets the world, I feel that presence again. Not aggressive, but watchful, a lingering fear that something shares these quiet nights, snapping branches to echo its existence, leaving you forever changed, adrift in the sorrow of knowing the wild holds watchers will never fully understand. The unease settles deep, a part of the road now, reminding me that in these Appalachians, you're never truly alone. Story 8. I've been a long-haul trucker since I was old enough to grip a steering wheel, spending more nights on the road than in my own bed. Crisscrossing the Appalachians where the mountains rise like ancient sentinels and the highways carve narrow paths through the wild. The Blue Ridge Parkway has always been my go-to route for those quieter runs. Less traffic, more scenery, with vistas that make you feel small in the best way. But there's a flip side to that beauty, an isolation that creeps in when the sun dips low, turning the woods into a labyrinth of shadows where you start questioning if you're truly alone. It was one humid summer dusk in 2015, the air thick and sticky like molasses, when things shifted for me. I just delivered a load of construction supplies near Milepost 500, up in the northern stretches where the Parkway starts to feel more remote. the towns fewer and farther between. The drop-off had gone smooth, but all day I'd had this nagging sensation of being watched, the hairs on my neck standing during fuel stops, a prickle that I chalked up to fatigue from the heat and the long hours. I wiped sweat from my brow, climbed back into the cab, and headed south, the engine humming steady as the light faded to a golden haze. The road wound down through the ridges, the humidity clinging to everything, making the asphalt shimmer like it was breathing. I kept the windows cracked for a breeze, the scent of warm pine and earth filtering in, mixed with the faint diesel from my rig. Twilight deepened, stars pricking through overhead, but the feeling intensified, a weight in the air, like eyes tracking me from the tree line. I glanced in the mirrors more than usual, seeing only the trailer swaying behind, but the unease built slow, a whisper in the back of my mind. After maybe an hour, I pulled over at a quiet Overlook to stretch and check the straps, the kind of spot where tourists picnic by day, but truckers claim by night. Stepping out, the gravel crunched under my boots, the heat of the day still radiating up. That's when I saw it. A smudged handprint on the trailer's side, right at chest height, far larger than any human's, easily a foot across, with elongated fingers pressed into the metal like it had been gripping hard, leaving dents in the paint. I stared, tracing the outline with my finger, the print warm to the touch as if fresh. No way it was mine. My hands are calloused, but normal-sized. A prank? But who out here? The isolation pressed in, the woods across the road rustling faintly, though there was no wind. I shone my flashlight over it, the beam highlighting the details, ridges like fingerprints but stretched unnatural. My stomach twisted. I'd felt watched all day, stopping at overlooks where the forest crowded close, sensing movement just beyond sight. Shaking it off as some kids joke or a smudge from the load, I climbed back in and hit the gas, but the night deepened quick, headlights cutting swaths through the growing dark. The feeling didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened, like whatever had left that mark was still out there. Branches crashed in the foliage off-road. Not the scatter of deer, but heavy, deliberate, paralleling my path. I accelerated, the rig groaning up an incline, but the noises kept pace, cracks and thuds weaving through the underbrush, too rhythmic for random wildlife. Sweat beaded on my forehead, the humidity turning the cab into a sauna, and I rolled the windows up, sealing in the quiet. But the scent seeped through anyway, musky, earthy like wet fur and decay, faint at first but growing, making me gag. I radioed out on the CB. "This is Ridge Runner. Anyone copy south of 500? Got some weird vibes out here. Sounds like something big in the woods." "Over." Static answered, then a crackly voice. "Probably a bear, buddy. These hills are full of them. Stay safe." But it wasn't a bear. I knew that deep down. The crashes grew bolder, closer to the shoulder, and I slowed around a curve, heart pounding now. The parkway felt endless, each mile marker a taunt, the darkness pressing against the windows like a living thing. I pulled over again, couldn't help it. Needed to check, to prove to myself it was nothing. The spot was another pull-off, gravel lot backed by thick forest, no other vehicles in sight. I killed the lights, but left the engine idling, grabbing my flashlight and stepping out into the humid night. The air hung heavy, insects buzzing low, and I swept the beam along the tree line, hard in my throat. There it was, standing at the forest edge, immense and shaggy, its form silhouetted against the fading remnants of dusk. Tall god, so tall, maybe 8 feet or more, broad across the chest, covered in dark, matted hair that dripped with moisture from the humid air. It didn't charge or flee, just stood there, head cocked slightly, as if puzzled by the machine idling before it, or maybe by me. The flashlight caught its eyes, deep set, glinting with a quiet awareness, not animal wild, but something more, like curiosity, mixed with caution. The handprint on the trailer flashed in my mind. This thing's hand would match it perfect, those elongated fingers hanging loose at its sides. It raised one slightly, mirroring my gesture with the light, and a deep rumble emanated from its chest. Not a growl exactly, but a vibration that unsettled the ground beneath my boots, humming through me like distant thunder. The scent hit full force then, overpowering, wild, and primal, turning my knees weak. I backed toward the cab, slow and steady, not daring to turn my back, the beam shaking in my grip. It didn't advance, just observed that cocked head following my retreat, as if assessing whether I was threat or trespasser. My mind reeled. Feral man? Stories echoed from truck stops. Folks gone wild in these mountains, hermits or runaways living off-grid for generations. Their bodies adapted, minds feral from solitude. Or older tales, the kind locals whisper about forest dwellers, guardians from Cherokee lore that watch the ridges, marking their territory on intruders. I dismissed them as yarns to pass the time, but standing there, the humid air thick between us, it felt too real, too grounded in the sweat and shadows. I climbed back in, slamming the door, the lock clicking like a finality. The engine revved as I accelerated away, tires spitting gravel, mirrors showing it standing still at first, then loping briefly along the roadside before diverging into the woods, swallowed by the dark. The crashes faded, but the dread didn't. Mirrors became obsessions. Every rustle a potential return. I drove through the night, stopping only at a lit gas station hours later, hands trembling as I fueled up. The attendant, an older woman with a drawl thick as the humidity, eyed the handprint when I mentioned it casual-like. Seen marks like that before, she said, glancing at the mountains. Folks say the hills have watchers. Best not linger. She didn't elaborate, just rang me up, but her eyes held that knowing glint, the kind born from living where the wild presses close. The print remained for weeks, a smudged testament on the trailer that I couldn't bring myself to wash off at first. Other drivers noticed at stops, some joking about Bigfoot, others going quiet, sharing hushed stories of their own, shapes in the mist, marks on vehicles, feelings of being paralleled on lonely stretches. Locals eyed it suspiciously when I parked in towns, whispering among themselves, avoiding direct questions. I finally scrubbed it clean, but the dents lingered, faint scars in the metal like reminders etched permanent. Driving south again days later, the route felt changed, the beauty tainted, shadows evoking that silhouette, the rumble echoing in my chest. I started avoiding dusk hauls on the Parkway, opting for brighter roads, but the mountains pull you back, their call undeniable. Years have passed, but the encounter clings like the humidity of that night, a grounded terror rooted in the real. My wife noticed the shift first, the way I'd stare into the woods during family hikes, or wake up gasping, convinced something watched from our backyard trees. She pressed gentle, "What happened out there?" I'd tell pieces, enough to ease her worry, but the full weight stays mine, a sorrow that twists confusion into every glance at the ridges. The kids ask why Dad doesn't camp anymore, why the stories around the fire stopped. I make excuses about age and aches, but truth is, the unexplainable dread has settled deep, turning survival into vigilance. Was it a feral survivor, body warped by isolation in the deep hollers, leaving marks as warnings? Or something from the forest legends, an ancient presence concealing itself in the shaggy wild? The not knowing gnaws, a lingering fear that the mountains conceal watchers who leave imprints not just on metal, but on souls. I still drive, the rig my livelihood, but every shadow along the route evokes that dusk, the hand raised in mirror, the rumble vibrating through. The Parkway's curves whisper now, eerie sounds in the foliage that could be wind or something more, crashing parallel just out of sight. Isolation used to be freedom. Now it's a cage, trapping me with memories that defy explanation, instilling a dread that echoes with each mile traveled. And on humid summer evenings, when the air hangs heavy and the dusk deepens, I swear I feel it again. That prickle on my neck, a smudge on the horizon, leaving me forever marked, adrift in sorrowful watchfulness, wondering if it still parallels my path, waiting for the next stop to leave its print. The survival isn't escape. It's enduring the echo, the quiet horror that in these Appalachians, you're never the only one on the road. Let's move to the last story. I've been hauling loads through the Appalachians for close to 30 years now. The kind of life where the road becomes your rhythm and the mountains your constant companion. silent and steadfast. The Blue Ridge Parkway has seen me through more nights than I can count. Those high passes where the air thins and the stars feel close enough to touch, far from the glow of cities and the chatter of crowds. It's a place of raw beauty, but also one where isolation wraps around you like the chill of elevation, making every shadow feel alive with possibility. In the fall of 2023, I was running a refrigerated load from Roanoke down toward Asheville, the kind of overnight shift that pays the bills but leaves you wired on coffee and quiet. The night was clear but chilly, the kind where frost edges the guardrails and your breath clouds even inside the cab. I'd cracked the window for fresh air, the crisp scent of pine and rock filtering in, keeping me alert as I traversed a high mountain pass near Milepost 150. Up there, the parkway clings to the ridgeline, dropping off sharp into valleys that swallow light and sound, the world below a dark sea of trees. The drive had been uneventful so far, the engine's steady hum, my only company, radio tuned low to some late-night talk show crackling with static from the altitude. That's when the whispers started, filtering through the open window, not the wind sigh through the pines, but low, indistinct murmurs from the cliffs above, like voices carried on the breeze. At first, I thought it was the radio bleeding through, or maybe echoes from a distant hiker's camp. But as I listened, they didn't fade. If anything, they grew clearer, rhythmic and patterned, almost like words in a tongue I couldn't place. I eased off the gas, slowing the rig to a crawl, straining to make sense of them. No lyrics, no melody, just murmurs, rising and falling like a conversation hushed against eavesdroppers. The chill deepened, not just from the night air, and I pulled over at a small turnout, the gravel crunching under the tires as I killed the engine. The sudden silence amplified everything. The tick of cooling metal, the faint drip of condensation from the rocks, and those whispers, now unmistakable, drifting down from the ridgeline like secrets spilled from the stone. I stepped out, boots hitting the ground with a thud that echoed too loud in the quiet, the cold biting through my jacket as I scanned the cliffs above. The moon hung bright, casting silver light over the jagged outcrops and sparse scrub, turning the pass into a monochrome landscape of shadow and gleam. The sounds clarified as I stood there, rhythmic grunts, low and guttural, interspersed with pauses like responses in a dialogue, an unknown language that tugged at something primal in me. Not animal calls, too structured, too deliberate. I've spent enough nights in these hills to know the yips of coyotes or the hoots of owls. But this was different, almost human yet alien, echoing off the rock faces with a resonance that made my skin prickle. Unease settled in, slow and insidious, the isolation pressing down. The nearest town miles away, no cell signal in these high pockets. I grabbed my flashlight from a cab, the beam cutting a narrow path up the slope, illuminating boulders and twisted roots, but revealing nothing at first. The grunts continued, closer now, drawing my gaze higher along the ridgeline. That's when I spotted it. A solitary giant perched on a boulder, maybe 50 feet up, its form outlined against the moonlit sky, fur or hair rippling slightly in the breeze as it gazed down at the road below. My breath caught, the flashlight beam shaking as I trained it upward. It was no hallucination. The details sharpened in the light. Muscular build, broad and powerful like a wrestler gone wild. A face with deep-set eyes that caught the moonlight, conveying a solemn watchfulness that felt too intelligent, too aware for any beast. The proportions were off for a man, taller, bulkier, with limbs that suggested strength honed by survival in these unforgiving heights. Hair matted and dark covered its frame, blending with the rock and shadow, as if it had emerged from the mountain itself. It sat motionless at first, head tilted slightly, the grunts emanating from its direction, now silent as it seemed to notice my light. Fear rooted me there, not a panic but a deep, instinctual dread, the kind that whispers of vulnerability in the face of something ancient and unknown. As I stared transfixed, it noticed me fully, eyes locking on the beam, then on me below. The whispers ceased abruptly, the pass falling into a hush broken only by my own shallow breaths. It stood slowly to its full, intimidating height. Easily 7 or 8 feet, shoulders rolling as it balanced on the boulder, movements fluid yet heavy, like it carried the weight of the ridge. A stone tumbled down then, dislodged by its shift, clattering along the slope to land near my truck with a sharp crack that jolted me. Whether intentional or not, it felt like a warning, a subtle assertion of presence. The air thickened with its scent, wild and ancient, carried down on the chill breeze. Musk like unwashed hide mixed with earth and pine, overpowering in its rawness, seeping into my clothes and lungs. It descended partially, stepping down to a lower ledge with deliberate, silent grace. No wasted motion, its form casting a long shadow that stretched toward the road. Those eyes never left me, deep-set and piercing, holding a solemnity that bordered on judgment, as if I were the intruder here, a fleeting passerby in its eternal domain. My heart hammered now, the cold sweat mixing with the night's chill, mind racing through explanations. A hermit, maybe layered in furs and filth from years alone? But no, the build was too massive, the movements too primal. Stories I'd heard in truck stops flickered through. Old-timers talking of feral people in the hollers, folks who'd vanished into the wild after hardships, surviving on instinct until they became legends themselves, whispering in tongues forgotten by civilization. Or the deeper folklore, Cherokee tales of mountain guardians, beings that watched the passes, communicating in grunts and murmurs to those who strayed too close. I'd always nodded along, dismissing them as ways to pass the miles, but standing there, the scent enveloping me, the figure descending ledge by ledge, it blurred into reality. Fear finally broke the route. I scrambled back to the cab, fumbling the door open, the flashlight beams swinging wild. I revved the engine hard, the roar shattering the quiet, headlights flooding the slope in harsh white. It shielded its eyes with one massive arm, retreating upward with a swiftness that belied its size, melting back into the rocks and shadows until only the empty boulder remained. I peeled out, tires gripping the pavement as I accelerated down the pass, the whispers resuming faintly behind me, fading with distance like a conversation turning inward. The drive blurred after that. Mirrors checked obsessively, every gust of wind a potential murmur, the scent lingering in the cab like a ghost. I radioed other drivers once signal returned, voice steadier than my hands. Anyone up near 150? Heard some weird sounds, saw something on the ridge. Over. Responses were mixed. Laughs about altitude playing tricks, a few serious nods to mountain talk, the old stories of voices in the wind. One voice, gravelly and knowing, added, "Them passes hold echoes, son. Best not stop to listen." I didn't argue, just drove on, the clear night turning oppressive, stars mocking my smallness. By dawn, I'd reached Asheville, delivered the load, and collapsed in a motel, but sleep brought replays. The eyes watching, the grunts forming words just out of reach, the stone clattering like an invitation declined. Weeks turned to months, and I tried to rationalize it. A bear distorted by moonlight, or a hiker in bulky gear. The whispers whined through crevices. But the details stuck, vivid and unshakable, the scent returning in dreams where I pulled over again, listening closer, drawn up the slope. My routes changed. I avoided high passes at night, sticking to lower roads even if it added hours. My wife noticed first. The way I'd go quiet during supper, staring out at our wooded yard as if expecting murmurs from the trees. She'd squeeze my hand, ask what weighed on me, and I'd share fragments, enough to ease her concern but not the full hollow ache. The kids sensed it too, wondering why Dad skipped the family drives through the mountains, why the bedtime stories of outdoor adventure stopped. I blamed age, the job, but truth was that pass haunts me now, a place of eerie communion where voices from the wild intrude, blending mystery with the mundane. I've returned in daylight, hiking the ridge near 150, searching for signs. A boulder perch, scattered stones, anything to anchor it in the real. Found nothing but windswept rock and silence. Yet the dread lingers, a quiet sorrow that something sentient shares these heights, whispering secrets to those who listen too closely. Truckers trade tales in hushed booths, eyes darting as they describe similar nights. Grunt from the cliffs, shapes watching from above, dismissed as fatigue, but carried like scars. Was it a feral wanderer, voice warped by solitude in the high places? Or a legend breathed from the stone, guardian of passes where the veil thins? The confusion twists deepest, no closure in the not knowing, turning survival into eternal watchfulness. These Appalachians don't reveal easy. They murmur through the chill, eerie sounds that could be wind or words, strange sightings that fade with dawn but echo in the soul. Years on, the fear has dulled to a persistent whisper, but it never quiets fully. I check the ridgelines more, even on flat hauls, half hearing grunts in the engine's rumble. The mountains call still, their pull a mix of beauty and burden, but now with a solemn warning. Isolation used to be solace. Now it's a reminder of vulnerability, a lingering sorrow that in these high passes, you're never alone. You're observed, assessed, whispered to in tongues that tease understanding but deliver only dread. And on clear, chilly nights, when the moon lights the rocks, I swear the murmurs return, faint on the breeze, drawing me back to listen, forever changed by the unexplainable, adrift in the quiet terror that something up there knows my name, waiting for the next traverse to share its secrets once more. The survival isn't in forgetting. It's in carrying the echo, the unresolvable ache that blends the wild with the within, leaving you forever attuned to the whispers of the heights.